Hi, everyone. Today and all this week, we're going to focus on Springboard Activity 1.20, Analyzing Martha. Next week, we're going to look at Springboard Activity 1.21, which is Martha, Martha Part 2. And both of those activities lead us directly into our first official embedded assessment. We're actually going to write that assessment when we come back after Thanksgiving break. We're going to do a little bit of talking about writing and how we can fit evidence from Martha into a literary analysis to help you out. That's what we'll do the days before Thanksgiving break. And then when we come back, we're going to spend time writing it. So I need to review what the embedded assessment is so that as we begin 1.20 this week, we know what we should be looking for and we can be set up for success. So you will be writing a literary analysis, and let's look at the assignment description in the green box here. Your assignment is to write a literary analysis in which you analyze how Zadie Smith, the author, uses literary devices or other elements to express the theme of coping with emotional turmoil in the short story Martha, Martha. All right, so again, Martha, Martha is the story we're going to look at in 1.20 and 1.21. And this prompt has already given us the basic theme. There are multiple different ways you can interpret the theme, and we'll talk about that as we process the story. But essentially, this story is about coping with emotional turmoil. The two main characters have experienced trauma individually, different trauma, and they cope with it in very different ways, which we will notice. Now, the author communicates this theme about how they cope with their trauma by the use of literary devices and short story elements. So, literary devices are those things such as the language choices of an author, using figurative language like metaphors, using imagery, using tone. Also, it includes things like irony or foreshadowing. So there are a lot of different literary devices that we can use to discuss her communicating the theme. The other thing here, the elements, these are short story elements. These are things like setting and characterization, plot development, the climax of the story, perhaps the exposition or the rising or falling action. So those are the story elements. And then, of course, the literary devices are those techniques that they use in the language and the tone. All right, so kind of switching over to a different screen here. We know that the theme that we have to talk about in the embedded assessment is coping with emotional turmoil. As I said, there are multiple ways the theme can be interpreted as we read the story. Two that I've identified so far are, one, people cope with emotional turmoil in different ways. I mean, that's just a statement, an observation about life. Also, people don't always know how to deal with emotional turmoil or, emotional turmoil. People who do not know how to cope with emotional turmoil make impulsive decisions or are indecisive or run from their feelings. So there's a lot of different interpretations. So not all of you will have to have the exact same theme. And as we get closer, we'll talk about how that works. So as we read the story, it would be very useful for you to take notes. So I have created this document. I don't want to force anyone to use my note-taking system, so I haven't put this in the Google Classroom. If you are interested in having it, I can post it, and I can also provide a link for it. So But I could just do this on a regular sheet of paper with my pen and pencil and just kind of write things down as I read, or as we're in our Google Meet discussing, or as you're answering some of the Springboard questions and you come up with ideas. So we're going to need to identify in the first table here, what are the literary devices that I think are connected to that theme? And what are some of the story elements that are connected to this theme? I'm going to tell you story elements. I already know of one. One here is going to be setting. And I say that because I happen to know when the story is set, and it's really important to understanding the emotional trauma. So we'll talk about that when we get there. Literary devices. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Already I know there's going to be imagery. There are such great character descriptions, both of their physical appearance and their personalities. Another story element that I know of is characterization. So as we go through and we identify what some of these literary devices are, we can add them to our notes. So then what we have to do is the analysis piece. So that first chart is really about identification, identifying the literary devices that the author uses and the story elements and all of the things that are related to the theme. Here in this next chart is where we're going to analyze them. So I put imagery up there. So I need to find some pieces of evidence that connect the imagery to the theme. So perhaps I would find a quote or some details in the story that tell me that are imagery, and then somehow show me how the character's dealing with stress or emotional turmoil. Okay, so I'm going to put one in here that I can already tell you about. Setting. So my evidence is in this first part of the story that we're going to read about early this week. The timing of this story is about a year, after 9/11. So it is the attack on the World Trade Center. So one of our characters discusses how life has changed a little bit after 9/11. So whether you knew someone who died in 9/11 or not, if you were alive and old enough to understand what was happening on that day, you were impacted by it and you were traumatized by it. So the trauma of loss on 9/11, whether it was their individual loss or a collective national societal loss, it doesn't matter. So it connects and relates to the theme because the trauma of loss on 9/11 is, I'm going to say, hanging over society. Okay, or I could say adding to the character's emotions. Okay, so now I could add more about setting. I do know more about setting, and then you might have more in here. So we might put characterization in here. I know that we're going to talk about character foil today. That's actually a literary device. So she uses character foil. So one chart or one set of notes where you identify, these are the things I could write about and have an entire body paragraph on. And then another one in which I analyze and identify the evidence and connect the evidence to my theme. So this is my recommendation to you over the next 2 weeks as we go through this story, that you take notes in a similar way where you identify and then analyze. All right, so and as I said, if you'd like to have that chart, I will put it in the Google Classroom for you. Okay, so let's get started on 1.20. I'm going to keep it short because, as I said, we're going to do most of it together or in your asynchronous activities, but we'll be talking about it in both of our Google Meets this week. So in 1.20, Analyzing Martha, this is the first half of the story, where we're going to analyze how complex characters are developed over the course of the story. So not just introduced, so they don't just exist. There are a couple of characters in here that don't really develop They're just there. But we have two main characters that actually do develop in their interactions with each other and the details that we learn about them. Those details are important to understanding the theme of the story, right? So we're going to recognize those important details and be able to identify how they help develop the characters and develop the theme. So here we go. In this activity, you're going to read the first part of the short story, analyze the literary techniques the author uses to develop characters. So the main thing I want to talk about before I finish this video is character foil. So this is a new literary device for us. When I clicked on it up there in the vocab list, it scrolled down automatically to question number 5, and this is in the working from the text. So these are things you're going to do later on in the week. But understanding character foil is important to being able to finish this week's activity. So I'm going to click on it for the definition. A character foil is a character whose actions or thoughts are juxtaposed against those of a major character in order to highlight key attributes of the major character. So, juxtaposed might not be a word you know. When you juxtapose things, you put them side by side, figuratively or literally, in order to make comparison. So, for example, if you're an artist or if you are in an art class, you might be learning about the color wheel. And you probably know that there are particular colors that when you put them together really cause the other color to pop. So for example, black against a neon color. The neon color pops, you juxtapose them by putting them side by side so that one emphasizes the other. So the darkness of the black really emphasizes the brightness of the neon or of a yellow or a white or a bright color. Okay, so we juxtapose characters in that same way. So you can take two characters, one who is very outgoing and personable and social and easygoing and kind, and put them with another character who is grumpy and almost toxic or unkind, or maybe they're not unkind, but maybe they're just serious and more practical. And I'm thinking about the TV show Friends, because a lot of you are familiar with that one. And we take the two characters, Monica and Rachel. They're roommates. One is very, very serious and she seems to be practical. I'm thinking about Monica now. And then you take Rachel, who's kind of a little bubbly and she's sometimes a little flaky and she's more into the romance of it all. But they highlight the characters in each other. Okay, same thing with like Joey and Chandler. Joey's not quite all there, although we love him dearly. He's not the most educated person. And then you take him and put him next to Chandler, who seems to have it all together. We learn, of course, in Friends that, he doesn't, but he seems to. And Joey looks like more the bumbling idiot, even though he's not that bad. Next to the other character, he seems even worse than it is. So, juxtaposing characters creates a character foil. So in our story, Martha, Martha, there is going to be a character foil. So looking at this one, number 5, that you're going to do later in the week, one of the literary devices authors can use to create believable, well-developed characters is the character foil. In Martha, Martha, the two main characters, Pam and Martha, are very different from one another. So we're going to discuss in our class, in our Google Meet, their similarities and their differences. And then we're going to talk about which one we think has easier characteristics to define, to identify. So we might make a T-chart, we might not. If you wanted to do that in your notes again, you could have a chart. It's just a 2-column chart, and you could have Pam on one side, Martha on the other, and you can put in the different characteristics about each one. So we will talk about this one later on in the week. So One of the things that I want to just quick discuss, we're not going to do this blue box this week. So please be aware, this is not a required assignment. You're going to go all the way through the check your understanding, but you're not going to go on to the next one. All right, this chart right here, so I was just saying you could make a T chart, but you're already really going to go through how they're different when you do number 3. Number 3 is in a Google Doc in the Google Classroom already. It's Thursday's activity for most of you. For some of you, we're going to work on it in our Google Meet. The table that's in the Google Classroom, you're going to fill out, and it's exactly what you see here in the Springboard Digital. You're going to analyze each character by looking at their words, their thoughts, and their actions in order to better understand why they do what they do and say what they say. So by analyzing the characters in Martha, we will also have extra information for our literary analysis that we're going to write as the embedded assessment. Okay, so as we read, you're going to annotate and take notes when we meet in our Google Meets this week so that you can complete the table that's in the Google Classroom and turn it in which you analyze Pam. So here's her appearance, what she looks like. You're going to find details from the text, and then you're going to explain what that tells me about the person. I know that they talk about Pam's boots. And so we'll put something about her boots in here. She wears what they call Chinese slippers. And then she changes from her Chinese slippers into walking boots. So we'd put that here, and then it would tell us something about her. So things that she says, her words, we'll put a few things here and explain what that tells us about her here. Same thing with thoughts and actions. And this one's interesting. What do other people say or think about the character? So we'd have to look at what Martha's impression of Pam is. So we have an outside narrator, a third-person narrator. So we get a little bit of insight. And so what does that narrator say, or what does another character say or think about Pam? We're going to do the same thing for Martha. So remember, this is in the Google Classroom already, and you do need to turn it in after it's complete. Don't spend too much time on it. What I mean by that is 1 or 2 details from the text is good enough. Both charts should not take you more than, say, 20 to 25 minutes. All right. I am going to leave the rest for our Google Meets this week. But please do take time to read through the story on your own. We will do some reading aloud, so be prepared to be called on to read. All right, you guys, this is gearing up for our embedded assessment, so please take this one seriously, and I will see you when we meet in person, well, in Zoom. All right, have a great start to your week.